David Hogg noted the other day, there are some, quote, sick effers out there who want to sell more guns, murder more children, and honestly, just get reelected. Well, on the stage on Saturday, his classmate Alex Wind agreed with this. Quote, if you take money from the NRA, Wind told the crowd, you have chosen death. So it's all pretty straightforward. If the NRA wasn't so blindly committed to killing children, if they didn't enjoy murder for its own sake, media dutifully amplified that message and formed a protective ring around the activists. As Politico reporter Ben White put it, quote, the sickening efforts to slime, undermine, defame, and dehumanize these young people betrays an enormous amount of fear. In other words, shut up, America. Don't ask questions. The kids know what they're doing. But do they know what they're doing? This week, aren't a big mystery. The piece was written by someone called German Lopez, whom Fox.com identified as, quote, research scientist wading in data. What America likely needs, Lopez concluded, is something more like Australia. Households with firearms has dropped. We ought to do our best to find out. The self-righteous Thomas is a Georgia State representative and an advocate of gun control, and she joins us tonight. Representative Thomas, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So what do you think would happen if we tried to confiscate so-called assault weapons from law-abiding Americans? How would people respond?
Well, I think yes, it's about how people will respond. But let's look at what happened back in 1994 when we had a ban on assault rifles. When mass shootings went down by 43%. That is what we want to happen. We want mass shootings to go down, and I think that's the most important point in this matter.
But didn't Columbine take firearms remain unchanged?
Oh, no. I mean, you're right. You're totally right about the Columbine situation. But you know what? 43% does not account for all. I said 43% went down. And think about...
answer to this question, and the death rate by firearms did not decline.
Congress lifted that ban, and mass shootings went up by over 200%. So those are the numbers. We're talking about the numbers. Those are the numbers. Mass shootings went up. So yeah, you might be right about numbers, but when we talk about numbers, it went up. Those are the numbers.
Yeah, but the murder rate didn't move at all. But what do you think would okay, those are the numbers. What do you think would happen if law enforcement, pushed by Democratic politicians, tried to take the guns from law-abiding Americans? What do you think the effect would be?
Well, I'm not talking about taking guns from law-abiding citizens. I'm talking about a ban on assault rifles. We are not trying to promote a militia. What war are we going at that we need assault rifles? Yes,
okay,
protect the citizens, protect your Second Amendment rights, but not assault rifles.
I mean, I don't want to argue with you, but here's the legislation that you supported in Georgia. The last assault weapons ban Democrats in your state pushed, and I'm quoting from the legislation right here. The Georgia Bureau of Investigations shall seize and take possession of any assault weapon, large capacity magazine, armor-piercer bullet, or incendiary 50 caliber bullet. Shall seize and take possession of. That's not voluntary, that's mandatory. So you've got hundreds of thousands of people in your state who own weapons that you say are assault weapons. Are you worried that someone might get killed if law enforcement comes, you've done nothing wrong, and say, we're taking your gun away, whether you like it or not? What do you think would happen? I mean, it's worth thinking that through, since you're supporting a law that would call for it, don't you think?
What I'm worried about is when the Constitution was made and when the Second Amendment was made, it stated that, of course, the Second Amendment. But let's talk about when it was made. That was when assault rifles, you had to take several minutes to reload an assault rifle. And now it's several seconds. So let's review that law.
Technology is very different. No, I agree.
But let's review that law again.
Okay, but you keep dodging my question, and most people do, but I think it's important because we're getting to a point where actual legislation has been sponsored and will be again, saying that the government needs to take people's weapons by force. And if you really care about preventing deaths, I wonder if you're concerned even a little bit that there might be a violent reaction to that. Is that a crazy thing to suggest?
You know what? It's not a crazy thing, Tucker. You're totally correct. By force is not what we want to do.
That's what the law says. Hold on. That's the law that you supported.
I live in Georgia, and in Georgia, we are a red state. I'm not about taking anything by force. I'm not about
Then why did you support a law that says that the state shall seize and take possession of these guns?
What I support is saving lives. And what saving lives is ban on assault rifles. These kids are out here and they are stating that we need to put a ban on assault rifles.
Okay, I understand. I mean, I think we both agree. We're both against killing, of course. Yeah. I just have real concerns about the effect of the law that you supported, but you don't want to address those. Let me ask you this question then. The overwhelming majority of gun deaths in this country are caused by handguns, not by so-called assault rifles. It's a tiny percentage. So why are we banning the gun that causes a small percentage of killings, but leaving the guns that cause the majority legal? Why does that make sense?
You may, and I understand what you're saying, you may say that it's a small percentage, but when it's your brother or when it's your sister being assaulted by an assault rifle, it's not a small percentage.
But what about the brothers and sisters
by an assault rifle is not a small percentage. And when it comes to your family member
don't demagogue it with me.
I'm not demagoguing.
I'm not in any way downplaying the significance of anyone. No, hold on. I'm not downplaying the significance of anyone's death. Of course, I'm as concerned as you are. I'm just wondering why, since assault rifles, relatively speaking, cause few deaths, handguns cause the overwhelming majority of deaths. Why are you not calling for banning handguns and seizing and taking possession of handguns? I don't know why, if you care so much about gun violence.
But I would ask you the same question. Would you call for a ban on handguns? No, you wouldn't. So that's not the question at hand. The question at hand is a ban on assault rifles.
People have a gun as a tool. Fewer American households have guns than they did 40 years ago, and yet the incidence of mass shootings is rising.
So why can we not put a ban on assault rifles? That's the question. Why not?
Well, because you have over 100 million semi-automatic weapons in the United States right now. What do you do with those? Do you
know
go to
what?
people's
You
homes and
give
take
them
them? That's
to
a
the
real
military.
question.
If people want to have assault rifles, join the military. Defend
But what if
your
they don't
country
want to give
by
up their
joining
guns?
the military. That is why
I'm
we
not
need
a
assault
child,
rifles
okay? I'm
to
an adult.
defend our
So,
country, not to shoot our kids in America. That is what is happening.
Okay.
That is what happened at Parkland.
I'm
That
trying
is
to
why
ask
we
you
spoke
adult
up.
questions.
You can give
You don't
up.
want to
You
answer
can
them.
give up if you want.
Right. Okay. Well, media coverage of the weekend's anti-gun marches was a lot like what you just saw. It was overwhelming. It was deeply one-sided. You think the Second Amendment still applies to Americans? Well, then you're obviously evil. That was the message. Watch.
There's really a handful of marches that you remember, that our town remembers: the civil rights marches of the 60s, the abortion rights marches of the 80s and 90s, Tea Party, Million Man March. I think about those things. This is right up there.
The wheels of change are happening, and I'm getting chills just having this conversation just north of the National Mall, where women's suffrage started and civil rights.
I think they'll exceed the 500,000, but whatever the number, the makeup and the content of it is something that this nation has never seen. This is an awe-inspiring moment.
Joe Concha writes about the media for The Hill. He watches a lot of television as a result of his job. He joins us tonight. So, Joe, there are people on the stage over the weekend who said, and we repeated some of what they said, if you disagree with me on gun control policy, you're on the side of killing children. You're in effect sympathetic to murderers. That's a pretty extreme thing to say. Did anyone covering this point that out? Or did it just slide like that was normal?
Oh, it slid because it is somewhat normal. If you've listened to the rhetoric on college campuses over the last couple of years, you're either with us or against us, and we're going to shout you down or even not allow you to speak if you differ from our point of view. I didn't hear a lot of talk about Graham Mills High School in Maryland, where an officer, or at least a resource officer, took out the shooter before there could be any further loss of life. One girl, unfortunately, did pass away last week. So that's obviously a solution that wasn't allowed to be presented, because in the minds of many of the people that were organizing this event, there is only one solution. That's an assault weapons ban. And, you know, you could agree or disagree with that, but you've got to allow other ideas to be presented to such a comprehensive problem. We've had 25, 26 mass school shootings at elementary schools, fatal ones, or high schools since Columbine in 1999. So let's hear some other ideas, or let's hear about also the failures of law enforcement, and if our police officers, they weren't in Broward County, ready to engage when these sort of things happen.
Were the 4 armed deputies standing outside the high school in Parkland and who allowed this massacre to happen, were they mentioned at all? Did you hear anybody make reference to them?
I didn't really see that. I saw a lot of David Hogg, who, when he first came onto the scene, Tucker, and I saw him on my television, I tweeted out how impressed I was in terms of how articulate and intelligent and composed he was. I said, that's going to be a big star in this business. And since then, he's gone a bit off the rails, and no journalists have actually challenged him. Let me give you an example. Quote, he told this to Fox News at the rally over the weekend: "We want this to be a community discussion. We can't have debates between Republicans and Democrats. We need to have a discussion as Americans." Okay, that's fair enough. But just a couple of weeks ago, he was on Bill Maher's show bragging that he hung up on the White House, and he said, look, we don't need to listen to President Trump. The White House had called to invite him to, ironically, a listening session. We don't need to listen to President Trump. President Trump needs to listen to the screams of the children and the screams of this nation, which is why, you know, he held a listening session at the White House. Okay, so you're not going to attend the listening session, but you're telling us that we have to listen to each other. So I'd like to see journalists more when he wants to be treated as an adult, and he has every right to his opinion. You need to challenge some of the things that he's saying.
No, you can't do that. No, you can't, because as Ben White at Politico reminded us, that would be dehumanizing the children. So you have to sit back obediently and pretend that they're wise. So the anti-gun coverage moved pretty briskly into the coverage of Stormy Daniels, the porn actress. This is now dominating cable news for how long, would you say, and to what end?
Well, it reminds us a lot of 2014 and the Malaysian jet that went missing. It seems to be the only story that's out there. But I'm telling you, this doesn't move the needle one bit Tucker, because I looked at the RCP average for President Trump's approval ratings, and now it's creeped up to 42%. Fox News had a poll out, he's at 45. CNN has him at its highest in 11 months, 42. So if this is so damaging and it's such an important story, it appears to be having the same kind of boomerang effect that perhaps happened with President Clinton, where people are saying, you know what, presidents have had consensual relationships, affairs going back to Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Bush 41, Clinton. They've either been accused of having affairs or they actually had them. And with Donald Trump, that people know what they got. They got a thrice married guy, New York City, who is in the tabloids on a regular basis, New York Post, Daily News. I grew up here. Trust me, I read about him. And there's nothing to see here as far as Trump supporters are concerned.
You cover TV. Yeah, I don't think they're too surprised. You cover TV. You know the people who work in our business. Do you think they're in a good place to lecture the rest of the country about personal moral standards? Do you think they're the people to be giving that lecture? Just kind of throwing that out there.
Based on what I've seen in this business, we're probably some of the last people, with some exceptions, of course, to be talking about that. But one more point, and I know you got to go. Anderson Cooper conducted this interview, and I thought he did a pretty good job. But the optics going into it, and I asked your producers to grab this photo. It was of him and of Stormy Daniels and of her lawyer, and they're all arm in arm. And this was taken either right before or after the interview. And I think if you're a Trump supporter, you saw that and you said, boy, I don't remember Mike Wallace or Bob Simon ever posing with the person that I'm about to interview arm in arm along with the lawyer to the side. So if I was Anderson, it wasn't his photo, I would have asked out of that situation.
Hilarious. Joe, thank you. Good to see you.
Oh, sure. No problem. See you soon.
Well, the 60-minute Stormy Daniels interview did massive ratings, 21 million last night. But does it matter? Mark Stein joins us next with his view of it. Stay tuned.
So I think people thought there was going to be like a smoking gun here. Did we miss something?
Stephanie Clifford, who performs naked in online videos under the name Stormy Daniels, went on CBS's 60 Minutes over the weekend. The ratings were huge. They spiked 111% during the interview. That, of course, was the whole point of the exercise. Clifford alleges that 12 years ago she had a one-day affair with Donald Trump. The White House denies this, though only half-heartedly. Cable news has been talking pretty much about nothing since, other than Stormy Daniels. So what do you make of this? Well, even if you assume the story is basically true, and you might, you still have to wonder why it matters. If you're a Trump supporter, you're probably not so surprised. You knew exactly who Donald Trump was when you voted for him. But you did it anyway because you understood the only options were people who hated you. If you're a committed Trump opponent, and pretty much everyone in the press is Stormy Daniels really the best you can do? If you're looking for a new reason to be mad at the president, I don't know, how about the budget deal he signed on Friday? That bill will cost more than $1 trillion, but does nothing to protect the country from the foreign invasion that's changing it at an unprecedented rate. Of course, the press all but ignored that and many more stories like it. Why? Because reporters could care less about voters or how the country they grew up in is vanishing. How about the 60,000 American OD deaths last year, or the shrinking middle class, people dying younger? None of that is interesting to them. Nobody in Brooklyn cares at all. So instead, TV networks are devoting their entire schedules to convincing us that Donald Trump is naughty. Because apparently Americans had no idea that Donald Trump had an outlandish personal life. It's not like he bragged about it in detail on Howard Stern a dozen times or anything, or got caught uttering vulgarities on the Access Hollywood tape. The rest of us are stunned. In related news, by the way, Chris Christie was cited yesterday eating a Snickers bar. Well, now that it's clear Trump is flawed, the media insists that America has an obligation to be shocked and disgusted. Because if there's one thing reporters do well, it's setting a high moral tone for the rest of us. And that's why people are so anxious to take important life advice from TV anchors. That's why parents dream about allowing anyone in CNN's primetime lineup to babysit their kids. Come on. What's actually more shocking and disgusting? Is it Trump's personal life, weird as it may be? Or is it the mindlessness, the hypocrisy, the dishonesty of your average TV anchor? Which of these hurts America more? It's not a close call, by the way. Mark Stein is an author and columnist who, until last night, had never even heard of Stormy Daniels. He's here to tell you. He joins us now. I'm sure you've watched breathlessly every moment of this unfolding saga. What's your view of it?
Well, I do think that if one is in the media, I think you should be. I'm an old Fleet Street hand, and we certainly knew something about sex scandals in the UK. 3 in a bed, autoerotic asphyxiation. I've been there, I've done that, I know all about it. And so when this thing started, and Tucker, you may have seen Anderson Cooper asking rather explicitly about the mechanics of the act, and I was thinking, oh, this is an actual sex scandal. I'll go and make myself a nice cup of tea and come back and settle down with it. I came back and there's some pasty bloke called Trevor, which isn't even an American name. I don't know what kind of self-respecting red-blooded American is called Trevor, but he used to be with the Federal Election Commission, and he's saying that Trump's lawyer may have committed a campaign election crime by giving Stormy Daniels $130,000. I'm thinking, my God, is there anything in this country that can't be turned into a federal regulatory infraction? I was just settling down for a nice sex scandal, and apparently it's a campaign finance infraction after all. And just to tie it all into that spending bill, as you mentioned a moment ago, you know, Trump paid off, if it's true, Trump paid off a porn star for 130 grand. That's the art of the deal. I would have liked to have seen that Trump with McConnell and Paul Ryan last Friday.
I totally agree. I completely agree with that. How does it make you feel to know when you watch CNN that the people in the anchor chairs are just a lot better people than you are? I mean, they're going to go to heaven. They'll intercede on your behalf. You'll probably get turned down. They're going to do their best, okay? Because their salvation is a certainty because of their deep decency and rectitude. How do you feel when they send that message to you?
Yeah, I think there is actually something faintly creepy about the moral preening of these people.
You think?
And in fact, if I were, I mean, just to be serious for a moment, I don't know a lot of porn stars. I think the last one I knew was from 1973, so she must be about 89 by now. But I don't know Stormy Daniels. She seems a perfectly pleasant person. I'll make a bet. She's a useful vessel to CNN and the others, and in 2 years' time, she's going to be broke and wondering what happened to all the fancy media interest and the smarmy lawyer. You know, it's Stormy and Smarmy, the particularly reptilian, oleaginous lawyers into whose hands she's fallen. The public interest in this is that John Edwards, who also is smarmy and oleaginous, when he was running for president, got into this mess. The Department of Justice's argument then was that John Edwards' family image was part of his political image, so therefore his family man image was regulated by federal campaign finance laws. As you said, Trump's the opposite. He's Howard Stern. He's showgirls. He's got more ex-wives than the previous 44 presidents combined and doubled. And so he does not have a family man image that falls within federal regulation. This thing's going nowhere. It's a dud. It's a bust. And Anderson Cooper may be turned on by it, but nobody else is.
It would be interesting to know if the press understands why Trump got elected. I bet there's not a single person who voted for Trump on the basis of his personal life. Just a guess. Mark,
absolutely.
Great to see you.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
Thank you. Well, Facebook built its empire on surveillance capitalism, but now the rest of us are waking up to what exactly that means. Can the company survive this? Should it survive? That's next. First, the company was rocked by the revelation that Cambridge Analytica harvested the data of 50 million users without proper authorization. Now the company itself is accused of shady data collection. Shockingly, a company whose entire business model is built on spying may have been spying on people. Over the weekend, ARS Technica reported that Facebook collected contacts, text messages, other private data from Android phone users without their knowledge. Roger McNamee is co-founder of Elevation Partners. He was an early investor in Facebook and a mentor to Mark Zuckerberg. He's now a sometime critic of the company. He joins us tonight. Roger, thanks for coming on.
Happy to be here, Tucker.
So, I mean, my one-sentence take on this is it seems like the rest of the country is waking up to the basic nature of Facebook, which is it spies on you.
No, I think that the issue is exactly as you framed it. The business model, which is based on advertising, requires them to know as much as they can about every single user. And what you don't know and what you can't tell as a user is that they're using every tool available. And Android phones, as Ars Technica pointed out, have a feature that allows a product like Facebook to download all of your contacts, all of your texts, and Facebook goes, well, someday we may be able to monetize that. We're just going to grab it while it's there. And a lot of people discover to their chagrin that it's not just Cambridge Analytica. In fact, from 2010 to 2014, there were at least tens of thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of applications that did the same thing. They harvested all of the user data that was out there without the permission of the users.
So, I mean, that information, those data, give Facebook more power over you than, for example, any government's ever had over American citizens. Should we be worried about that power?
Well, I believe that that's the kind of power that requires great judgment. And the thing that we've seen in recent months is that Facebook's judgment around its power has been really poor. And I personally, as somebody who mentored them, who was involved as an investor, who was at one time extraordinarily proud of it, my tenure there, which was from 2006 to 2009, was before the company had really developed a business model. And so I was withdrawn while this stuff was going on. And as I came to understand what was going on, I felt it was important to reach out to Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg and make them aware of it, which I did in 2016. And it's hard when you're in the position they're in to recognize that your baby has suddenly become a huge problem. But I'm afraid it has. And candidly, I'm glad these revelations are coming out because we need them to change their strategy.
So Android users found out that they're being spied on by Facebook. Do you think we're going to learn that Apple users are being spied on as well?
No, Apple has a different architecture, so I think that probably not. I think the sad thing is we're going to discover if you're an Android user, it's not just Facebook who's spying on you.
Right.
The difference is in Apple's model, because the people pay directly to Apple when they buy the phone, Apple treats those people as the customer. With Android, it's the phone company that's the customer. And so just as in Facebook, where the advertiser is the customer and the user is the product, the user of the phone to Android is also a product. And that's the problem with the model. It's that they aren't treating us like humans. They're treating us like the fuel to generate profits. And candidly, I think that has to stop. I think all of Silicon Valley needs to reassess why it's in business and recognize that they can be incredibly profitable. They can still be billionaires without stripping the privacy from everybody and selling it to the highest bidder.
Well, I mean, it took 40 years for the government to respond to the health effects of tobacco, which weren't recognized at first. It slowly dawned on people, and then the government took action. How long will it take our government to respond to the bad effects on our society of Facebook and Google?
Well, to be clear, Tucker, I don't think the best response will be the one from the government. I think the best response will be from the users and from the employees of these companies. I don't think the employees understood exactly what the companies were doing. And I think as they understand it, they're going to appreciate that, wait a minute, that is not something they want to be part of. And I think you're going to see some kind of pushback and rebellion. One of the things we've been trying to encourage the employees of Facebook and some of these other companies to do is to recognize that, hey, wait a minute. These are great ideas. These companies make great products, but the advertising business model has terrible incentives, and literally billions of people are being hurt by it, not just in the U.S., but around the world. And that, frankly, they can be successful without doing that stuff, and it's on the employees to fix it, because let's face it, the government is not going to be able to fix this on a time frame that's going to make any difference.
No. Well, that's a good point. They're not even trying. I hope that happens. Well, Roger, thank you for that. We're out of time, but I appreciate
my pleasure, Tucker.
Your knowledge and your candor. Up next, Professor Jordan Peterson is questioning the modern left's core assumptions about gender and a lot of other things, and for that crime, they've decided he must be annihilated. Jordan Peterson joins us next. Stay tuned. University of Toronto professor Jordan Peterson has become a phenomenon. That's not an overstatement. Videos featuring him online get millions of views. His book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, is one of the biggest, maybe the biggest bestseller ever written by a Canadian author. In that book, Peterson questions the left's rhetoric on gender, and maybe for that, he's being targeted for destruction. The Guardian calls him dangerous, Vox just published a massive and almost unbelievably stupid piece accusing Peterson of, quote, reactionary politics that validate white, straight, and cisgender men at the expense of everyone else. Really mouth-breathingly stupid, but there you have it. Jordan Peterson joins us tonight. Professor, thanks for coming on. So obviously a hurt dog barks. You've done something that has made people upset. What do you think you've said that the left finds so provocative and upsetting?
Well, I pointed out quite clearly why they're factually incorrect and ideologically possessed. I mean, is particularly on issues like gender. The radical lefties insist that gender is a social construct, and that's just simply not true. So the scientific data on that are absolutely crystal clear, and no reasonable scientist disagrees. And so they're all foaming at the mouth because I'm poking holes in their cherished notions. And they like to think that people are completely malleable because that means people can be made over in their ideological image. So they're not happy about that.
So when they say your ideas are dangerous, what they're really saying is your ideas are dangerous to them.
I hope so. They're supposed to be dangerous to them. I make no bones about that. I'm not a fan of radical leftists. And look at what happened in the 20th century with radical leftist ideology.
What has your job been like back in academia? I mean, you can't be one of many people who has these views where you live and work.
Oh yeah, well no, I think they're more common than you think. I mean, my views on gender, for example, and sex, they're shared widely among people in the psychometric personality community. Anybody who studies personality and who's a credible scientist knows full well that the differences between men and women in personality are to be attributed primarily to biological factors. This isn't contentious. The only people it's contentious around are gender ideologues, and they've already lost the scientific battle, and so they've taken it to the legislative front to enforce their views. So they're really not contentious viewpoints. They're mainstream science, and I'm criticized all the time for spouting pseudoscience. It's like, it's not pseudoscience, it's mainstream science. And people who know the literature aren't disputing this. It's been known at least since the 1990s.
Well, then why are people whose views are not rooted in science, but instead in emotion and superstition, dominating our public conversation and punishing anyone who doesn't disagree? How did they get so much power?
Well, look, I actually think there's a technical reason for that, is that, you know, it's obvious that things can go too far on the right and they can go too far on the left. And it's kind of easy to put a box around people who go too far on the right. You can just look at claims of racial superiority.
Right.
But it's not so easy to put a box around people who go too far on the left. There's not a single thing you can point to that they do that has the same sort of red flag nature as claims of racial superiority. So it's hard for people who are left-leaning, say, and concerned with inequality and that sort of thing, to dissociate themselves from those who've clearly gone too far. And the problem is we really don't know where the red flags are on leftist territory. Now, for me, it's equality of outcome is a good, you know, so-called equity. That's a red flag, but it doesn't seem as immediately pathological as, say, claims of racial superiority. So it's harder for people on the left to dissociate themselves from the people who would do everyone in, essentially.
So you drew the line at pretending that biological sex isn't real. I mean, that's how you first became famous, because you said, I'm not going to lie about science. Well, do you think it's a good place for the rest of us to start?
Well, I think it's a reasonable place. I mean, the Canadian government built a social constructionist view of gender into the law, and that's just incorrect. I mean, the idea that biological sex, gender expression, gender identity, and sexual preference have no relationship to one another, that they vary independently, that there's almost nothing you could claim that's more false than that. But now it's been written into the law. Well, it's just patently absurd, and it's actually a telling commentary on the state of political discourse across the West, that something like that could even happen. Yeah. But I think it's equality of outcome that's the real pathological desire. That's a bad one.
I agree. But, I mean, I guess the good news is that taking a stand on behalf of obvious truths, there's a huge audience for it, and you're living testament to that. Thank you, Professor. Good to see you.
No, good to see you, too. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
All right.
Thousands of homeless people have created a tent megapolis along Skid Row in Los Angeles. Katie Hopkins flew across the ocean to spend a weekend there. Her story, her new video, and her next. For more than 100 years, California was the Golden State. In the past 30 years, it's become the poverty capital of America. A higher percentage of Californians are impoverished than in any other state. Tens of thousands of homeless people live in LA County. Many of them are concentrated in a tent metropolis along Skid Row. So what's it like in California's heart of darkness? Rebel Media's Katie Hopkins came over from London and spent this past weekend there in downtown Los Angeles getting a sense. She joins us now with her report. Katie, you're not from the United States, you don't live here, so you have, I think, a kind of fresher take on this. What was your reaction when you saw Skid Row in LA?
Well, for a long time, you know, every time I'm in LA, you drive past Skid Row or people point out, oh, that's Skid Row, that's where the homeless people live. And it's almost as if everyone can just turn away, look away, don't go there. Even in a hotel that was giving out maps, they put a sticker over Skid Row, so as if it doesn't exist. So I figured, well, I'll go there, I'll stay there, I'll meet the people that are there, and I'll just see how big this problem is. And I can tell you, Tucker, it's like nothing else on earth. I've been to some migrant camps, but this is worse than that. It is one big sea of human waste and effluent and rats and filth. And the number of rats there just outweighs the population, which is in the order of 2,000 to 3,000 people living in these tents. And it is a desperate situation, but I really feel as well there is a human health hazard in the center of LA downtown, and that is a time bomb waiting to go off. It's very much like London in the 1600s, just prior to the bubonic plague. And that's what you guys are up against. And it's no wonder that Democrats would rather talk about sanctuary cities or dreamers, because that sounds so much nicer than potential bubonic plague in the middle of downtown LA.
So some of the video that you sent us is too over the top even for us to show, and this is, you know, taking place on the street. It's too disgusting, honestly. I walked around Bombay, India not long ago, all day, never saw anything like this. Los Angeles is much richer than Bombay. Why does this exist in a city as rich as LA?
It's a curious thing, you know, people go there, there's lots of tears and sympathy, there's lots of missions, there's a women's shelter, there's a place, you know, a lot of places of care. But I think ultimately and fundamentally what's missing from Skid Row is someone capable of gripping the place. You know, Democrats are always full of tears, tea and sympathy and giving out charity. What you need in there is the military to go in, you need housing units put in place, temporary shelters, and you need to clear the area in order to clear it up. And that's not going to be done with sympathy, and that's not going to be done with, oh, it's such a shame, these poor people. That's going to be done with some kind of military operation to clear up that area. And no one's really going to want to take that. And what we need in America, I think, is more leaders who are willing to be unpopular, and a few more journalists perhaps who are willing to stop navel gazing or gazing at the cleavage of Stormy whoever, and actually going out there and reporting on some of the reality that we face day to day on streets that no one's talking about.
Right. And it's not just, I'm embarrassed as an American to say to you, a Brit, that it's not just Los Angeles. It's Chicago, it's San Francisco, it's Washington, D.C., it's New York City. There's something that connects these. So give us...
I think that's right.
Right. So give us your 15 seconds on that. What do you think it is? What's the cause of this? What's the ideology behind it?
I think this all stems from the sense that everybody is free to do whatever they want, in the sense that we'll support the fact that the family unit doesn't matter anymore. We'll support the fact that you can rely on the government for everything. We'll support the fact that the government's supposed to provide you with a house, that you don't have to take individual accountability. And what ends up then is a bunch of people who are completely lost, who are beyond help. You shut down the sanatoriums as well. They have nowhere to go. But tea and sympathy and allowing people to live however they like isn't going to cut it. And this entire area of downtown, no one goes